Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the sport where boxing's now got its own Oscars night. And it was probably the night boxing didn't really need. In a week which has been kind of flaccid apart from Jara Pataya doing a number on David Naika, which was to be expected. Probably not too much depth to add to that other than now the conversation goes, what would Opatara Cruiser do against Usyk at Cruiser? I'm not going to jump into the Opatara would knock him out or beat him up group. I think he'd cause him some problems, but I think Usyk would figure him out. Opatara is potentially special. I think Usyk is special. And while it feels like a gap of semantics and wordplay, in terms of what it means in the ring, the gap is absolutely huge. So let's talk business. So this weekend, the great and the good, right? And that's what you're going to call it. The great and the good were in attendance at the Ring Magazine Awards. Now, we didn't even, 3 months ago, we didn't care about the ring, right? This is another thing that boxing fans are being forced to attach importance to. Like they did with that lineal nonsense, like they've done with Undisputed, like they're doing with the IBO title. They're trying to almost create a boxing reality that we don't really recognize as boxing fans. So they have this award ceremony. Now, let's be absolutely clear what this was. This was a convention, right? This was a convention where everyone's petitioning for Saudi cash. That's why everybody got on that plane. If you look at who didn't attend, it's the people who don't need the money. It's the people who are, okay, Mike Tyson wasn't there. I don't know if Mike's bigger than the sport, but Mike's bigger than the current version of the sport, and he showed that with the Jake Paul fight. Mayweather's not there. Mayweather's bigger than the sport. You know what I mean? Let's not lie. In this country, I'd say Frank Bruno's bigger than the sport, Nigel Benn bigger than the sport, Eubank Sr. bigger than the sport. The people who were there were people who need money. And I don't mean that they're broke or poor, but they don't want to leave the gravy train. So they were there to curry favor with Turkey. Curry favor with Turkey, and do all of that. So it's a bit cringeworthy because there are various tiers of people who are there. So Canelo's there, and for me, he's a Turkey pet project, right? Because I can see there being tremendous value in having Canelo or just even affiliated to Riyadh season. And I think for Canelo, he's realizing that PBC money train is slowly derailing. Crawford's there, obviously, because Crawford's looking for a fight that's big enough for him to cash out on with his legacy intact, and he wants that Canelo fight. I can see why those guys are there. They're the top table guys. Usyk's the top table guy. Bivol's the top table guy. You notice Beterbiev wasn't there. He doesn't need it. So all of these guys are top table guys who are there for me. Then you've got the other guys. Actually, I want to put Dubois there, top table, because he won an award. Then you've got the second tier, and Joshua's in that second tier now because he's looking for a way out, and only the Saudis can really fund his way out. Hearn's in that position. There are a load of other guys in that position. And so you're watching this, and really the only thing, apart from free food and alcohol, the only thing to have come out of that is just channels like Seconds Out, Boxing Social, Sky Sports got a load of content about fights that we probably won't see. That's the sum total of it. The MVP of the night was probably Derek Chisora, and I'm going to stand up business when I say this. Canelo Alvarez speaking English. I've never seen what do they call it? A glow up. That's what they call it now, isn't it? The glow up, the leveling up. When you could put words to his facial expressions, all of a sudden Canelo became a more interesting guy. I just think he's brilliant because he's top tier, right? Like Canelo is... he's won belts in practically every weight class he's entered in. So you have to respect him. I don't know if anyone noticed. I want to touch on a couple of things about this Ring Awards show before we get into the boxing. When Joshua was with Canelo, Joshua's got a foot on Canelo, right? But Joshua looked like he was in awe of Canelo. And in my head, I'm like, but you're a heavyweight, AJ. And whatever we want to think about you held 3 of the recognized world titles for a long time. Your chest should be out. when you're meeting Canelo, and he should be like, wow, that's AJ. Instead, AJ had that body language of, wow, this is Canelo. And they were talking. And it's almost like Canelo just had that kind of sympathy. I don't want to say pity, but sympathy, like, don't worry, man, you'll be back, you'll be okay. And it's like Joshua was looking for that. His body language suggested he was looking for reassurance all night. And people say, oh, you're just sounding like a hater. Perhaps, but we have to talk the reality as we see it. Now, people may see it differently, and that's cool. Let's have the debate. But if I'm Anthony Joshua, and I've been splattered, and this is the first time that the public really get to see me, that my peers, my heroes, get to see me, I'm coming out at my deluded best. I'm walking out going, listen, Daniel Dubois won. Yes, I got knocked out, but go and look at the shots that he had to survive. If I'd done those in the first round, there's no way he's landing. I would have been in that mode, full delusional mode, chest out, shaking hands with everyone, but he can't do that. And this is what I mean when I say you can't manufacture a boxer, you can't manufacture a fighter. Their physical dimensions. I think when you saw Joshua and Dubois next to each other and you just looked, Joshua looks very narrow front to back compared to Dubois. Joshua looks very narrow front to back when compared to Usyk. And I genuinely think that thickness from front to back is a large part of what makes fighters tough. But then there's a psychological element, right? There's that point where you go, just believe in yourself. Believe in the delusion, because every boxer is living a delusion, right? You are. Crawford's living a delusion. Canelo's living a delusion. Usyk's living a delusion, but they're willing to back it up and to do whatever it takes to back it up. And I wish we could see that in AJ, but maybe if he did that, we'd call him fake again. I don't know, but I just feel there's a massive opportunity that's gone to waste here, because he came and he was quite timid, and he's saying he wants the Fury fight to happen. I'll be honest with you. The fact that Fury wasn't there would indicate to me that he ain't really interested at this moment. That may change, but at this moment, he's not really interested. And secondly, I don't see what complicates the Joshua fight. I really, really don't see what complicates it, because they already had the 2-fight deal agreed, right? So all you need to do is probably just shift the percentage. I don't see, there's no barriers to that fight. You could announce that fight tomorrow and say, look, the fight's happening. We're just going to agree on these percentage splits. That's all. Here's your date. Book it in the summer. I'd imagine it will happen in end of August, early September, if it ever does happen. And then there you go. You crack on. But I just don't see either guy wanting to go through another camp. They're vulnerable. If I had lads going into that camp, I'm like, go and hurt him. That's what I'm saying. I'm going to set about him. Yeah, set about him, build a name for yourself and go off that. That's what I would be doing, if I'm being honest with you, because they're all vulnerable now. In other matters, the talk is of Canelo versus Crawford. That fight will happen. From what I'm hearing, it's just the modalities of it. Where does it happen? How much control will Canelo have in that fight? And I think that's really where the arm wrestle is. Crawford's already agreed to his side. It's about really getting Canelo on board, and Canelo going, if I come to this side of the line, I can only come here as a partner. So I'm not coming as an employee. I'm not coming subservient. I am Canelo, and I need to be treated as such. Kind of like the Mayweather thinking. And then what was the other one that was being talked about? Haney Garcia, that looks like that's likely to happen. I'm not sure if it's next, but people talking about that fight seems to be done and dusted. A bit of a worry that, the talk amongst all the other fights that were being mentioned, the talk was of 2 people who failed drugs tests being front and center in all of this. And boxing has no sense of irony and no sense of kind of like, should we be doing this? Should we not be doing this? But that's the game we're in. Anything goes. That's why we had a silly black tie event that most people didn't wear black tie to. I'm actually happy to see Teofimo Lopez there. Hopefully there's something for him. I think just move him up to 147. Let him deal with guys like, I don't even know, just some of those warmed up guys they can get. Because eventually Garcia and Haney will meet him at 147. And then we'll get the fights that we want. I don't know if Tank will go to 147. I think he probably could. But he'd fight. He'd be like Manny Pacquiao, where he'd probably just come in at 144. Just no weight cut. And arrive and cause havoc. And I think he could still cause havoc with his power. So something I do want to talk about is, why was Ben Shalom there? You've got a show in Sheffield with one of your future stars, and you're not there to promote him. You're not there to promote the event. You're not there to promote what comes afterwards. It's kind of left to everyone else to do the heavy lifting. Now, one of two things is true. Either he doesn't get it, but he's too smart. But Ben's not stupid. He's an educated young man. He's a smart guy. You got to look. You don't get from whatever those businesses, dark kitchens and stuff, whatever it is he was doing back in the day, you don't get from that to a Sky Sports contract if you're stupid. All right, so Ben Shalom's a smart guy. So the conclusion I have to draw is Ben is probably done with Sky, and he's just there for what he needs to be there for. And really, his future is mixed in with all of what was happening at those Ring Awards. Now, whether that's another channel, whether it's DAZN, I have no idea. But he wouldn't have been there otherwise. I was also surprised that Ben Whittaker was there and not on Sky, telling us what the future's holding. So as boxing fans, this is what I mean. You're not the priority. You know, they always talk about we do this for the fans. They don't. You're not the priority. You're genuinely not the priority. Because if you were, here's what would have come out of the Saturday night Ring Awards ceremony. Here's what would have come out. A list of fights that are going to happen in the first half of this year. Because everyone was there for this stuff to be agreed. Turkey's been having meetings with everyone, and he just has to pull rank and say this is happening or we're moving on. So why was none of that really announced? The Eubank Ben, they're saying is nearly done, but they've been saying that for a while. It's always been penciled in for kind of end of March, early April time, right? That's kind of the sweet spot for that one. And I imagine it hasn't been announced because they're waiting for everyone's blood to clean up, would be my suspicion. When will it happen? Whenever Ramadan finishes. It's not going to happen before that. Not enough time to build. So whenever Ramadan finishes, you'd expect to see that fight happen. But let's come back to Ben. Poor Callum Simpson. Like, the questions are, who do you want to fight next? Not what's next. Who do you want to fight next? And these are the small things that boxers have to get better at. Like, have the answer before the question would be my advice. You've got to have the answer before the question. So we should know who Callum Simpson's fighting next. Are they going to dig up Lerone Richards and say, look, you got to fight Lerone Richards, clean up here? Is he going to fight a Zach Parker, jump in with Zach Parker? Who's he going to jump in with? Are you going to find someone like a Lennox Clark? I don't know. But they need to have these views, because right now I look at it, I'm like, yeah, that wasn't great. Like, you've got Callum Simpson, one of your future stars. You've got Caroline Dubois, definitely one of your future stars. And they're having to do the heavy lifting. They're having to be the promoter. And I wasn't happy with that. I think, as boxing fans, we should be catered to. And that means we want to see the shows promoted there. Don't tell me to watch a show you're not watching. That's it. Do not tell me to watch a show you're not watching. Give Hearn credit. I'm not sure. I don't say Hearn's at every one of his shows, but he has coverage at one of his shows, right? Like, if he's not there, Frank Smith is there. So there is coverage, and there's an attempt to make sure there's matchroom coverage. In this case, there wasn't. So that was disappointing. Do we need to touch on Carl Froch? Like, Carl has some very strong views about a lot of topics that he seems to be walking back from now that there's money and there's access on the table. And he could be potentially getting involved. And look, I'm not going to knock Carl for understanding what side his bread is buttered on. But just be a man. Like, Froch used to like honesty and transparency. Get Carl Froch back out to say, listen, I can't knock people who are going to offer me money. That means that I ain't got to worry about property development anymore. And I'd get it. We'd all get it. But it's the lack of honesty. You know, Carl's not the voice of the fans, and he's not the voice of the hardcores. This is why I'm telling people, if you're really a boxing fan and you want an unfiltered view and an unfiltered perspective, you have to start listening to these channels like Porky's Corner, etc. You have to listen to stuff like this because this hasn't been bought yet. It might one day. I'm not going to ever rule that out. But it's not been bought yet. So we can give those perspectives that people aren't giving, but still keep the fans informed. And I think that will cover off the Ring Awards. I don't think it will ever become a thing. I just think it's what boxing doesn't like and it's what boxing doesn't need. You definitely don't want to do it in London. And if you don't get the Mike Tysons and the Floyd Mayweathers and the Frank Brunos and the Manny Pacquiaos, if you don't get those guys in on it, you don't get the De La Hoyas, etc. What's the point? What's the point? I mean, it's just, yeah, it's like eating vegetarian chicken. Just no point at all. So let's talk about the Sky Sports card. How do you describe that card? That, in terms of standard, I was very weak. That was just very, very weak. Now, that's a card you make when there's no money. And you're like, we got to pay the A side, so we can't really pay the B side what we'd like to. So this is what you're going to get. And these are those dark days of Matchroom. Do you remember when Hearn was doing the double dipping between DAZN and Sky? And you could see on which side there was money because the DAZN shows were star-studded, and what he was doing on Sky, you just rolled your eyes and said, why are we even watching this? And it felt a bit like that. If it hadn't been like minus whatever, I don't think I'd have watched that. It was a crock. From top to bottom, it was just a crock. Let's summarize it. There was a young kid, Mauro Silva, that they're saying trains out of Pat Barrett's gym. I like him. I think 6'2" as a middleweight, he'll be all right, but he looks massively underpowered, though. That would be my only concern about Mauro Silva, is just he doesn't seem to have that thing where people respect his power. Now, how you fix that, that's down to his coaching team. But I looked at that and I went, the young kid, Emmanuel Zion, didn't really look troubled by the power. He looked troubled with the work rate and the punch variety, which were massive ticks in Mauro Silva's box. But he didn't look bothered by the power. And that's not a high-level fight for Mauro Silva. So when you're getting up to those kind of higher levels, like Jordan Granham's not going to respect that. And Jordan Granham will bring a lot more complexity to a fight than someone like Emmanuel Zion would. And Zion really looks like he should be a welterweight. Probably could make welterweight if he wanted. Just an interesting point. I'd never seen a boxer. If you can get the YouTube feed, go and watch Emmanuel Zion at the end of the second round, where his words were, I don't need any instructions. Do not give me instructions. And I was like, how do you talk to your corner like that? If that was my corner, I'm walking out. I'm like, you lot handle him. I don't want to see this guy again. But maybe he's just a complex character like that, and that's how he is. Because he was talking to his corner. He was like, yeah, I'm not taking advantage of the right opportunities, or I'm not in the right positions, whatever it is he said. And I was like, what the hell? Partly, I was like, credit to him for being so clear-headed. But I'm like, mate, if you're that clear-headed, are you working hard enough in these rounds? More to the point, but not my business, not my fighter. So I don't know what that Mauro Silva kid's ceiling is. I just think, like, even at British level, like, he ain't punching holes in Linus Sadofia. I can tell you that for absolutely nothing. He is not punching holes in Linus Sadofia. He's not punching holes in Nathan Heaney. So how far can you really go without that pop? Not very, in my opinion. Hopey Price's little brother's at Ellis Price. He boxed. Another Caldwell fighter. Looks like Caldwell's building another stable. I imagine it'll just be the same story. They'll get to British level and then fall apart beyond that. It is what it is. Just all massively underpowered. Caldwell guys just seem to be underpowered, and I can't explain why, but they seem to be underpowered. If we look at Caroline Dubois, just unlucky. Was beating the brakes of her opponent, whatever her name was, Kamara, can't remember now. Beat the absolute brakes off her, open up a cut in her eye. That's when I feel like the the technical draw rule's really unfair. But I understand why the rule exists, because imagine Carolina got cut while she was doing the beating. We would have said, no, that's a technical draw. Let them go again, or no contest, right? That's what you'd have wanted. So I know why the rule's there. It just felt in this case it was a little unjust. But then I call that the definition of a good rule. A good rule is one that creates a little bit of injustice somewhere, because that's when you know that the rule's being tested and it's working. So who else was on this unbelievably forgettable card? Scott Forrest against Devon Miller. I don't think the result doesn't tell the story of the fight. I don't think Devon Miller is a terrible fighter, for the record, and I say that because obviously we've got mutual friends. He's not a terrible fighter. I don't think he's built to be a cruiserweight. Like because he's very wide, right? Now when I look at guys who are wide, to the untrained eye, you're like, oh my God, yeah, look at him, man. He looks the part. But there's not a lot of thickness from front to back. If that was my fighter, I just want thickness from front to back. For boxers, I'm looking for not a broad chest cavity, but a deep chest cavity. Even if you're a little bit narrower, that's okay. But that deep chest cavity, because most punches are pushing you backwards. I mean, most boxing movement is from front to back. So if you can absorb more of that with your musculature, it's a lot easier. But the stuff that Devon Miller does, he falls into what I call the South London trap, where a lot of guys, especially Southeast London, it's all about upper body movement, and we neglect footwork. That's what I saw in that ring. Scott Forrest can crack, man. The guy looks like he'd been training with Dennis McCann or something, and that's not to cast aspersions. I haven't seen a cruiserweight in that kind of shape, like all the time. All the time, even when there's no fight, all the time. That's not really possible. Like, he might be genetically gifted like that, perhaps, but at 30, But he goes onwards and upwards. I don't know what you do with him. Whack Scott Forrest in with a Lewis Oakford, right? Because you got to bear in mind, like, he's got 9 years on Alois Jr., and based on what we've seen so far, Alois Jr. would handle him with glee. In fact, I'd almost give Scott Forrest someone like a Tommy Fletcher. Winner stays on, and go from there. Who else have we not talked about? We haven't talked about Sam Hickey. So for all the Scottish people who say I don't like Scotland, I love Sam Hickey. I love what I saw last night. And what I love about Sam Hickey is this: targeted the same place, but knew how to disguise it. A lot of times, you drop someone with a body shot, you go straight back to it. But he had enough nous to go, no, that's gonna hurt him for about another 2 or 3 minutes. I can tap him up here and then go back and then hurt him again. Until eventually I beat the fight out of him. And that's what he did. That's a lot of composure. And you know, when you I've given him a cracking stick. So I'm going to give him a cracking praise, because like that's his training team, right? And fair play. They've picked a good one there. We just need to see two things. One, what happens when he gets cracked on the chin. Two, can he dog it out? And if he's got those things, then yeah, I think Scottish boxing's in for an entertaining time. I enjoyed watching Sam Hickey. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Would have liked to have seen more of it. Who else do we need to talk about before we wrap this card up? Simpson versus Steed Woodall. Woodall was rusty. That's the harsh truth. He was rusty. He's not fight fit in the way that Callum Simpson is, where Simpson is having that curated career where they're picking people carefully. Woodall was just there as an opponent, which is a shame. I know there was a time when he was associated with Dean White, and that was going to be his route back. But people will just look at Steed Woodall and go, that's just another guy they pulled off a building site to box. Now, Steed Woodall came up with guys like Ted Cheeseman back in the day. He might have even come up with the McCormacks. I think that's all the same generation. Like, they all boxed internationally as like schoolboys together. And so they bubbled through round about the same time. And so he's kept good company. And you could see that in the first round, where footwork was decent. It looked like he knew what he was doing, but he was just that 10th of a second off, which you are when you're rusty. Callum Simpson handled business again. And with his size and his skills and whatever, it's going to take a lot to beat him. Like, I think he's a guy you've just got to maul. You just got to maul him. Just maul. There's forearms in there. Just make it nasty, because I don't think he'll have the experience to tame that. But I don't think many British boxers have have the experience to execute that. But overall, that card, trash. It's trash. There's enough experience at Sky to put together a product where you go, actually, what we're going to do is we're going to have our project fighters on here, right? And so for me, the project fighters are Callum Simpson, Caroline Dubois. Yeah. Outside of that, we're going to give the fans some fun, entertaining fights. That's when you call guys like Carl Greaves and go, can we borrow some of your guys? You call Steve Wood, can we borrow some of you guys? You ask Joe, can we borrow some of you guys? Let me not forget Billy Denise. He looked all right, but very hard to gauge him until we see him in with one of those benchmark opponents at light heavyweight. So let's see what he does next. But looks like he's got a little something in those fists. And obviously when you're guided by Joe, you're going to be looked after. But in terms of overall, you can't be a promoter and not be at that show and not have coverage. That's just my take on it. And I'm sure the people at Sky will be looking at that going, yeah, that wasn't good. Last thing I want to touch on. I didn't realize I was going to talk for this long. Shane McGuigan saying that we need to wait for the Adam Azim versus Dalton Smith fight. Why? Why do I have to wait? Like, this is what I mean when boxing people are self-interested and don't care about the fans, right? We have a glaring case study sat somewhere in Hertfordshire right now in his mansion. Yeah, that he doesn't tell people he lives in, but he does. And he's regretting not fighting Fury when it was popping. Yeah? And Fury sat somewhere in the northwest, Morecambe, wherever the hell he is, regretting he didn't fight Joshua when it was popping, when the fans were like, this is it. Okay? Dalton Smith versus Adam Azim is just a fight we need to see. It's not seminal. It's not two Hall of Famers. It's not two all-time greats. I don't want anyone to say, oh, you don't know that yet. Yes, I do. I love Adam Azim. I think Azim's class, right? But I think Dalton Smith is class as well. This is the time the fight has to happen. The fans want to see it now. Maybe we want to see it again 3 years down the line. I don't know, but we want to see it now. You push this out 2 years, 3 years, we ain't going to care. We're just not going to care. Dalton will go in a different direction. He might have a great fight with like a Jack Catterall. Then they get into a trilogy or whatever. Now the Adam Azim fight's gone. And so Shane's like, yeah, I don't care what these trolls say. This is what I'd say to Shane's face. And I've got a lot of respect for Shane, and I always will. But he's isolating himself from the fans. You know, like you can do this when you get in that boxing bubble. You isolate yourself from the reality. And Dalton Smith versus Adam Azim does not sell out the O2 in 2026, 2027, 2028. It just doesn't, right? Because no one is going to spend the money required to give one of those guys a world title to fight for on that O2 show. There's no investment budget. I know now, because they're not fighting Dalton Smith, I know Lipnitz isn't as good as Dalton Smith. But I know Dalton Smith isn't as good as Jack Catterall right now. So that's telling me where Adam Azim is. I don't want anyone in that fight week telling me that Lipnitz is a serious guy. He's not. He's shown up because he's probably got some debts he needs to pay off, a tax bill or two. And that's okay. That's the nature of the beast. You got to work in the thing that you're best qualified to work in. But nah, that's not a fight. Like if they drag that fight out, we ain't going to care. We're just not. And I don't want anyone sliding in my comments or anything telling me that will be a great fight 3-4 years down the line. The truth is we have no idea. We know it's hot now. Therefore, make it now. This thing that a fighter should get the most amount of money for every fight, don't care about that. No one here listening right now is paid the most amount of money their organization can pay them. Nobody. We're kind of just paid what they can get away with. That's just how life works. So yeah, I disagreed with Shane on that. And if that labels me he has a troll, fuck it, so be it. That's one of those tone-deaf things you should never say, whether you're a trainer or a manager. Never say that. Like, yeah, we're just going to fight when we want. We don't care what the fans think. Yeah? 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 Okay. See what happens when you upset the fans. And we're going to see the same thing with Liam Cameron. I don't want to hear this empty rhetoric about, yeah, the fight can happen down the line and stuff. Look, and I get it, right? I get the big picture here. Ben Shalom's got to show some wins for Boxer, right? And getting Cameron versus Whittaker on his show, A, gives him the kudos. B, gives him control of the event, which he wants. C, gives him the advantage for his fighter, which he wants. I understand all of that. Put the money down and make it happen. I also understand that those promoters are trying to squeeze Ben by making him look foolish. The way Ben deals with that, give me the money to make this fight happen. We'll put on a super card. We'll get Ben on there. We'll get Caroline on there. We'll get Callum Simpson on there. We'll make it a real, the best of the nation on one card. Yeah? And if we make that strong enough, it can be pay-per-view. Or we go, right, we put this on the Eubank versus Ben. I don't care where it happens. Make the damn fight happen. I have a feeling it may land on the Eubank versus Ben card, but don't quote me on that. But I understand why Ben's like that. But sometimes you just got to come out in the media and tell the truth and say, listen, Ben's one of our prize assets at Sky and at Boxer. We're going to do all we can to have control of that. That's all this is about. And once the fans know that, now we understand where you stand. I don't want to hear nothing else. I don't want to hear no legal speak. I don't want legal letters. I don't want nothing from nobody. Simple as that. I just want us as fans and us as people involved in the sport to just have absolute clarity on why things aren't happening. That's all. Nice and simple. What else do we need to touch on? Just aware that I really want to wrap this up in under 35 minutes. Number one, if you didn't listen to the previous episode with me, Martin, and Andy, make sure you jump and listen on that. Feedback's been really, really good on that. I'm hoping we can do more. I want to do more than just one a year. But I think we just need to work out the mechanics of that and how we can make that sustainable, but also high quality, because we always want to push the bar. Second thing, we'd also love to do a live show, but I wouldn't do one unless we could do 300 tickets. Anything over 300, it becomes impersonal. And then anything under, you're like, can you really get yourself motivated for that? So keep the pressure on social media. Let's drive this conversation. We'll call it Road to 300. But I'd love to do that. And people say it's an ego thing. It's not really an ego thing. It's more about having 300 people that love boxing that don't necessarily all know each other, having the opportunity to mingle. If they want to have a drink, and get to know other people. Put some faces behind the Twitter handles or whatever, and then you can all shake hands, have a chat, get along, and then at least at that point there, whatever happens after that, you guys all splinter off and have your own little groups. Brilliant. Our job is done. There isn't enough of that in boxing. And that's really what drives a lot of these live events. It's not even about, if it breaks even, that's cool, it breaks even. But it's really about getting that kind of critical mass of boxing fans in a venue together, so we can show, look, we know when and how to come together. So that's really the aim behind that. The last thing is, I'm going to try TikTok. Now, there are people who are far younger than me listening to this. I don't know how to start on TikTok, but hey, if you're on TikTok, make sure you run up the thing. Let's get some numbers up, man. I am on 0 today. I only started set it up, I think, last night. So I'm on 0, which is quite humbling for me because it's been a while since I've been on 0 on anything. But TikTok's interesting because it's very, very different. I think on all the other social media platforms, it's really about new content with existing talent. But on TikTok, there are loads of young kids who are starting out their boxing journey that I probably wouldn't have access to any other way. So what I'm going to try and do on TikTok is be more of a boxing coach and an analyst in that sense. And so keep that content separate from the Insta content, separate from the pod content, because I like to compartmentalize my mind that way so it works. But now I'm looking forward to that journey. I don't know where it's going to take me. I might embarrass myself. But hey, never be afraid to be vulnerable in life. Always try it. And if it doesn't work, hold your hands up and say it doesn't work. I didn't think Facebook worked this time last year. I was sat on 2,500 followers and I was like, this ain't really like all the other pages. A year down the line, it's 22,543 or something. And I'm like, thank you, God. And thanks to all of you for supporting that. So please, the TikTok thing, it will be done in a different voice, I think. I'll say stuff that I probably wouldn't say on a pod, because pod's more long form, and this is just going to be like an abbreviated version where I can just get to the point, be a bit stronger in the things I say, and just go from there. Right, tapping out now. Have a great week. Don't be afraid to do the things you said you were going to do, and don't be afraid to do stuff that makes you happy, as always.